Okay, let's talk about what project management is now that we understand what a project is. Project management is, and this is a direct quote from your PMBOK, it's the application of your knowledge, of your skills, and of your use of tools and techniques to project activities to meet the project requirements. That is the official definition of project management. Now, this application of this knowledge, process, skills, tools, and techniques, if you do them right, they can have a significant effect on your project success, which is what PMBOK's all about. There are 10 project management knowledge areas in PMBOK. Let's look at them. Integration, and I'll explain why that's bolded shortly, or I'm sorry, why it's italicized. We have, here are the main knowledge areas. Scope. Scope is what it is you're going to build, your deliverables, your product, your results, or your service. The time it takes to do that, the cost to do that, the quality of those products that you deliver, the human resources that are needed to fill out your project team, and communications, of course, is key, how you communicate your project. In fact, I'll say this again later, but the general consensus in the project management community is that 80 to 90% of a good project manager's job is communicating to their constituents, to the team, to their stakeholders. Without communication, you're down the road to failure, so you need to communicate. Risk management in a project is incredibly significant. Without this, you don't know how to respond if there's a problem. So you need to consider risk, and we have an entire knowledge area, obviously, about this, and we'll get to that sooner than later. Procurement. If you need to buy goods and services from the outside, procurement is a huge knowledge area that you need to understand and interface with. And in fact, in smaller projects, depending on your organization, you as the project manager may actually be doing some of the procurement, although that is rather rare. Most organizations have their own dedicated purchasing staff, or they have a purchasing procurement representative on the project team. So procurement's a big one. And stakeholder, without stakeholder, understanding your stakeholders completely and staying engaged with them entirely through the project, you're setting yourself up for big time failure. So you need to know your stakeholders, and that's one of the first knowledge areas that we're going to talk about. Here's the same list, except I bolded 4 of these items, and I did that because experience, even on the project management forums, on LinkedIn and on other sites, it is recognized that without integration, without good stakeholder management and engagement, without understanding your project risks, and without applying quality methods to not only your deliverables but your actual project processes, you're going to have a difficult time achieving real project success. In fact, these 4 items are the most misunderstood or not even considered in many project plans. So these are incredibly important, and we'll talk about these quite a bit. And integration is not a particular thing. It is all of the other knowledge areas here combined, interacting, being iterative, and just integrating. And if you don't integrate properly, you're going to be doing things that are not contributing to the success of your project. So integration is actually the first knowledge area we'll talk about. As a matter of fact, if you look at this list and you look at your PMBOK chapters, these are not in the sequential order of your PMBOK, and there's a reason for that. Because we're going to talk about integration. That's what holds everything together, makes everything work in a coordinated manner. Then we talk about stakeholders. It's so important, you need to do stakeholders first. And then you consider your human resources, where you try to establish your team. Okay, you establish your communication methods, and then you go out with your stakeholders and you develop your scope. What exactly is it that you're going to produce, deliver by your project? Now, once you get your scope, Then we're going to talk about risk, because once you do that, with your communications, even your human resources and stakeholders, you have a lot of inherent risks that we'll talk about, and you need to address those now before you get too deep into the project. And then we'll talk about quality. You know, once you've got your risks under control at that point, and you know exactly at that point, now you know, why do I keep saying at that point? We'll find out, but at that point, you know what you're going to be delivering, and you want to apply quality to them before you actually give that to the client as a final product. And those four, integration, stakeholder, risk, and quality, again, are important. So we're going to talk about them in an advanced order than is what it would be actually in the PMBOK chapters. And then, finally, we talk about time. Time is where most project managers, when they get a new project, they sit on their desk, they call up Microsoft Project, and they start cracking out a project schedule. No, you can't do that. You got to do these other things first. And then you put your costing to it, and then we consider procurement. Now, in the real world in a project, all these things technically could be going on at once. Okay, generally, they could be. But we have this one-way interface here, so we're going to take these in this order. But always consider, and you'll see this reminded throughout the series, that these things are interactive and iterative, and they relate in ways we can't even depict in a drawing. But we're going to take them one by one. So here's the 5 project management process groups. They are initiating, planning, it's in bold, it's a big one, directing and executing, monitoring and controlling, and closing. In initiating, that's generally where we first initiate the project. It's authorized. They select a project out of a number of candidates, and here's your new project. They may earmark and allocate some funding for it, but at that point it is still not an official project. You need to create your project charter, and once that's signed by your sponsor, then you have a viable project. That's initiating. Planning, a big process group. If you don't plan right, nothing else is going to work right on your project. Just trust me on that. So once you plan all of those knowledge areas, how you're going to manage all of those knowledge areas, then you actually apply that, which would by then include your scope and your time and your cost and your schedule, so you know what you're going to be doing. You go into the directing and executing process group. That is where you actually produce the deliverables that are part of your scope. That's the production end of things. Now, throughout all this, you're monitoring and controlling, even from day one. Again, these process groups overlap and integrate. So from day one, when you start to create your project charter under initiating, you're going to be monitoring and controlling to make sure that the actions you take and your project team take are in compliance with the prescribed processes and procedures of the planning group and the directing group and the closing group. Now, closing is very often overlooked by project managers. When the project's done, remember, here, Mr. Client, here's your deliverable, nice, file closed, you're done. No, there's quite a bit to do in closing. So we'll talk about that toward the end. So these are your 5 process groups. Keep these in mind. You should know these by heart pretty soon. Now, if you look in your PMBOK at table 3-1, you'll see this chart over here. This is a knowledge area process group activities, or your ETOs, your activities. It's a matrix, and all 47 processes are never duplicated anywhere. So if you have a look here, you can see the 10 knowledge areas go down the left side of the column. Your 5 process groups go across the top. And then in the body of the matrix are all of the 47 process groups. Now notice, get my little mouse out here, notice up here, here's planning process group. Look how many there are. There are 26 activities, which are processes. These are the 47 processes in planning. You can see how very important it is to plan before you execute, which is what this is basically saying. And look at plan time management. Look how many processes are in there. So planning your timing is very important. There are a lot of processes. They're detailed so that you don't miss things. And when we get to these and review these, you'll see the elegance of why we should be doing these things. So you're going to refer to this table many times throughout this course and throughout your professional career if you adopt the PMBOK methodology. So let's go a little further on this. Before I mentioned, here's your scope at this point in time. Here's this at this point in time. Well, what that means is at that point in time, you're not done. You're going to be improving and gathering more detail and fixing things, making corrective actions, making preventative actions. You're going to be refining your documents, and that's all called progressive elaboration, which is a key term in the PMBOK lexicon. So it doesn't mean you do something and you're done. It's not Rev 1 locked. No, it's Rev 1 through Rev whatever it is throughout the project as you improve it and go back and do that. And there are controls to control changes, which is what project integration management is all about. Integration management is about change, and we'll see that. So key project management activities. The key activities are you need to identify your requirements, which is your scope. Sounds easy, give me one of these. Well, how big, what color, what are your options, what are the features, what's the, just all this stuff is incredibly detailed, and you get this from who? You don't know what to produce. You have to ask the stakeholders. You have many stakeholders, more than you can probably even believe at this point, and we'll find out why there are many stakeholders. But you will have some key stakeholders, and those are the main people you want to go to get their needs, and not just once, over and over and over again, progressive elaboration, so that when you do build something, you build it the way they want it. Okay, very important. Again, extensive communications. If you don't communicate with your team and you don't communicate with the stakeholders, you're in a world of hurt. So we need to be able to communicate consistently, okay, and only provide the communications that the receiver wants, what they expect in the format and the manner and then in the timing they want it. So that's part of our communication plan that we'll find out. Balance competing restraints. You always have competing restraints in a project. Your scope changes, right? You can't change the scope. You can recommend a scope change, but scope could change if it's approved by your stakeholders. The schedule, of course, may change based on many factors, and you don't want the schedule to change because you're managing a project according to what we'll find out is your schedule baseline. But the baseline, if problems become egregious enough, you may have to re-baseline and reschedule your project. So that's competing restraint. Cost is a competing restraint too. Do you buy this? Do you buy that? It's the same thing. What's your better deal? This is cheaper, but this warranty is really bad. Really good warranty here, but it costs more. Is that worth it to you? What's your organization's and your project's risk appetite for that? We'll talk about that under risk. So that's a competing restraint. By the way, these first three, scope, schedule, and cost, there's a word for that in the project management community. It's not in the PMBOK lexicon, okay, which, by the way, is the glossary in the back of the PMBOK. That's your lexicon. And you'll need to know this for your PMP exam because, again, the PMP exam is not quizzing you on what you know about the words in the PMBOK guide. They're quizzing you on how do you apply the best practices in the guide to your real project management personal experience. So because of that experience, you should know that scope, schedule, and cost are called the triple constraint. And by the way then, a lot of practitioners also consider quality risks and resources as part of the triple constraint world. But officially it's scope, schedule, and cost. We'll talk about that. So let's look at our next slide soon.